Hello, beautiful. Welcome back to the final episode of the first season of Asian Provocation. I've been wanting to bring on today's guest since the inception of the podcast. We met one summer in Berlin at a kickboxing gym. I remember our first meeting. It felt like we already knew each other long before. There's a kind of look and understanding with some people and their aura that you just know that this person understands. She's a storyteller, a writer, she's articulate, fierce, and she's taught me how to find softness within the fire. She's full of life and passion. She writes fiction, poetry, personal essays, and queer erotica. She, like her work, is full of beautiful contradictions, disembodiment, and intimacy. Can you tell us your name?
My name is Akhir Stewart, and I go by Akhir Ali.
So you let go of Stewart?
I sometimes let go of Stewart. I do. I love alliteration. Also, Stewart has these really harsh consonants going on. They don't really match my energy in terms of just what it sounds like. Although the name, of course, I respect because of its historicity and it belongs to my family. But in terms of just how I represent myself sound-wise, Akhir Ali is better for me.
Do you find that there are some people that have a more difficult time grasping these concepts or your name?
They definitely have a difficult time grasping the pronunciation. But it's not apparent because, most people are saying it correctly, ironically enough. It's just that my dad decided to go a different route, and I totally respect. He just added an extra syllable in there, Akhir, as opposed to Akhir or Akhir.
Was there a reason for that? What was his rationale?
I want to say that he was just being himself. For a long time, he told me that my name meant princess, which is not true. In Arabic, it means last.
How do you feel about that?
Some things are meant for you to reveal. So the fact that my father didn't fully understand the meaning of my name, it was meant for me to translate, not for him. It was comfortable for him to name me that because of what he thought it meant, but it was empowering for me to find out what it actually meant.
And what about Stewart? Do you know what's the history of that name?
Oh, it comes from my grandfather's side, my mom's dad's side of the family. They're the Stewarts, and my grandmother's side are the Mosses. I'm tempted to say that it was given to us by the people who owned that side of my family at a certain point in Virginia. Naturally, I entangle, in a way, the histories of my mother's side and my mother's mother, my mother's father. I have a tendency to, meld them. Not purposefully, it just happens. So I don't want to say anything that isn't true. So I'm just going to stop at that is probably a name of someone that owned somebody that gave life into our lineage.
How do you unpack something like that in your daily life?
Huh.
I have my own relations and issues, but then I was thinking about this story in terms of a conflict resolution. There was a group of people doing conflict resolution, and there was a Native American man that was in this conflict, and it was discussions about property, and they were trying to find a diplomatic way of the usage. The guy was really upset because he said, look, my great-grandfather, he was promised in retribution a block of land and a horse. That was agreed upon, but it was never fulfilled. And because of that, all of the generations going forward, we've been cheated from that agreement because we did our part. So that gets me thinking every time I read about history or hear about other people's history. And in one way, it's impossible if we're all going to forever hold on to all of the history and iterations, and it all goes back to some random monkey in a cave. But, it's like, oh, but then you did that, but you did that, and then that it just goes on forever until the Big Bang or whatever, and then say, well, then it was because your planet crashed into my planet and blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, we're not exactly talking about ancient times. We're even just talking countable generations, and even things that even the hurt and the frustrations or the injustice of even recent times. But still, I guess it's a long ass way for me to ask you how you felt about living in Europe, because a lot of people in Europe would say, well, that's not our problem. We didn't do that, or that's not our issue, and that seems like a very American problem. For you, on a day-to-day basis, how do you feel? Do you feel that it affects you? Do you think about these things on the smallest things? Because I remember that time when you, just for context, you and I both, we met at a kickboxing gym, and later you told me that you quit that place, and one of the reasons you even told the gym was that it was racist. I wonder if you would speak about some of these issues and your feelings on that.
So I identify myself with my memories. Like my identity is in my memories. So just branching off of the gym thing, what was happening was that when I was very young in middle school, I was sent off to something called a leadership camp. And at this camp, I was the only Black person. It felt like there were hundreds of children my age there to go learn this thing. I don't even remember what we were learning, but everyone was white, and the event took place in, or white passing, and the event took place in Chevy Chase, which is a wealthy area in the DMV. And for people who don't know what DMV is, DC, Maryland, Virginia. And it was a traumatizing experience for me because it was the first time that I was outside of my element. I was raised in inner city DC. I went to a majority Black middle school. And then I was sent off and was surrounded by people who did not come from my background at all, who were hesitant to relate to me, who were hesitant to look at me, who were hesitant to speak to me. And when I came back from that experience, that's when my mother and my grandmother sat me down and told me that I was a Black woman and what that meant. Because there was at no point had my family felt the need to explain to me what color was in American society, especially since humanness was the priority. You know what I mean? So when I went to that gym, I was basically re-experiencing that moment of only being surrounded by people who were not from where I came from and did not look the way I did, and that were also hesitant to look at me, hesitant to be my partner in sparring. And it triggered that. Was the gym itself inherently racist? No. Was I definitely triggered by that environment? Yes. And I don't think of these things on a daily basis. Usually what happens is I enter a circumstance, I enter an experience, and then I'm transported to something that definitely was racist or definitely was jarring. I think as I get older, I'm learning to register my emotions in a way where I think to myself, okay, is this happening or is it happening again? Or is this a new experience that I need to look at in a new way? I definitely don't go around pointing fingers at people and thinking about what and saying in a way, you've done this to me. I kind of let that go because it's important for me in order for me to function in society, for me to forgive other people and to forgive myself. And also it's just difficult for me to function when I'm considering my color and my culture in every circumstance. What for me matters is treating people. I know this might sound extremely broad, but frankly, treating people with respect, treating people how I want to be treated, and then taking it from that point forward. It sounds really obvious, but honestly, if I went into every space considering my complexion and my culture, I would have a difficult time speaking up for myself, and I would have a difficult time representing myself to the truest extent, because if I really depend on how my culture and my color has been defined over the histories, then I would definitely be stifled and I would definitely become a difficult person to be around, because there's a lot of hurt in that history and there's a lot of unfairness in that history and there's a lot of defensiveness that can come from a deep everyday consideration of how people of my complexion and people of my background have been treated over the years. And then, and also in considering that I'm not the only one, that every person and every individual has their own intertwined tragedies and traumas to be considered in every interaction. I think forgetting is a beautiful thing. Forgetting is a beautiful mechanism of the mind, a biological mechanism that honestly contributes to our sanity. And I take full advantage of forgetting. Forgetting and forgiving, yes.
The difficulty between speaking out some of these feelings and experiences versus not offending people.
Right, right. Mm-hmm.
But how do you deal with not even it's not even about trying to call out, but just trying to share with people that something is hurtful or even that it brings up certain memories? How do you deal with that?
Oh, that's...
And when do you deal with that? So for example, just because you did tell them your feelings and your memories, right?
I did. I told them my feelings. I did not tell them my memories.
And how did they react to your feelings?
Oh, it was so extremely understanding and also disappointed. Looked a little frightened because I think with me in particular, I went to their gym. I was a regular. I did also feel really sad that I had to leave. It's just that when you're in a boxing class, you want to find someone to box with. So
And
just
nobody
the
wanted to box with you?
oh, it was just this awkwardness, and I would always get. Always is a strong word. But I keep saying it because it's true. Okay, so I consistently felt like I was having problems finding someone of my caliber to box with because I'm like extremely tall. There's a lot of things about me that, contribute to my aura. And I felt like it was difficult to find someone who were willing to like come with you. I felt you were like in your eyes, I could see you. I was like, hello. Like we saw each other. But a lot of people, when you look in their eyes, you can tell they're not seeing you. In fact, they're like really eager to look past you. And I felt that a lot in that class where people were eager to look beyond me to find someone that they could actually, I suppose, relate to. So that was annoying. It was just annoying. And I just wanted to be in a space where when it was time to pair up, people just wanted to pair up. They wanted to spar no matter what was happening, the vibe. I just wanted a different energy. And I can't go around saying the reasons why, but I know, but from my memories, it was evoking a very familiar energy from a space that was racist. But the way I'm very confrontational generally, like when I decide to talk about something, there's no other way for me to talk about it besides bluntly. I don't have the language for vagueness. I tend to be really precise. So, in circumstances where I decide to speak up, more than likely it's going to be exactly what I'm feeling. So, emotions, in other words, are difficult for me because emotions, I don't know if it's the English language or what, but I don't always feel readily equipped to express more difficult emotions, especially now in intimate spaces. When it comes to professional spaces, I'm really very ready for that. But intimate spaces in which, my personhood is being challenged in a romantic relationship, in a relationship that I've developed over the years, that's a little bit more difficult, probably because of my expectations. This person knows me. Why can't they just figure it out? Versus this is a gym class. I don't know any of you people. Burn the bridge. And also because I'm so emotionally invested in a situation in a way when I meet someone and then when I like someone and I become involved with them, there's almost like heart surgery. You have all these like veins, these really sensitive places where you and that person meet, and it's really hard to distinguish between it, and it's really hard to talk about those things where you're layered, where you're intertwined. You're like, is this my fault? Is this their fault? Whose fault is it? Like, what's happening? Is it my insecurity? Is it their insecurity? And it gets like really blurry like that. I have no choice but to say, okay. Okay, I can admit to myself that I'm passionate. The best way to describe it. I'm passionate when it comes to those emotions, and I'm more than willing to share after a moment of denial. There's always like this flicker of denial where I'm like, no, because I'm uncomfortable with my weaknesses. And the moment that they start to show themselves, I'm like, there's the reflex is denial. And then after that, after denial is like this kind of acceptance where I recognize what the person is saying and what I said, and see the faults in myself. And then the apology is on the tip of my tongue. And of course, there's always a contraction. With every phase of growth, there's a contraction. I feel like even within a sentence, there are like 7 contractions. Within an apology, there are like several ways that you want to bite your own tongue or retract that statement. But that I reach that space of vulnerability and I'm able to be apologetic and able to see my faults and also able to share myself when I think about that memory and share the memory. Why am I having this reaction? Because of this that happened to me. And it's usually something extremely painful that's happened to me that even the mechanisms of forgetting had a hard time censoring. And once I share that, I'm able to speak from a place of mending, of healing. Like no matter what I'm saying, because my intention is to heal, it doesn't hurt as much. It doesn't hurt me as much to say it. And even if I hurt that person's feeling, I know that I came from a place of healing and well intention. For me, it's like I can't help. I totally cannot control that person's response to the things coming out of my mouth. All I can do is make sure that what's coming out of my mouth is truthful and ultimately soft. It's coming from a place of softness and vulnerability.
And this is why I love talking to you. And I'm not just trying to butter you up for my podcast, but maybe I am.
Okay.
I do see the difference though in you with compared to a person, say, that hasn't had to deal with as much conflict compared to a person who is much more blending in to mainstream society. It's a kind of privilege, but in another way, let's say you and I have the privilege of having these difficulties to be forced a little bit to learn and how to deal with this. But because of that, our understanding and skill set or the ability for this particular kind of language and heart surgery is much more tuned than people that don't have to deal with this or practice this on a day-to-day basis. I think what is interesting about society and social interactions is that you never really know what you're always going to get, and you can't control everybody, and we can't all go on this. That's the exciting thing. I think that's what makes life very interesting. And I like what you said about the conclusion to coming to softness, because I think it's so easy to go on this path of rage and to connect too much to the anger, the reaction to that, the desire to want to be hard.
Yeah.
For me,
Yes.
it takes a lot of energy to say,
Yes.
to be the quote unquote bigger person. You know, this person doesn't
Mm-hmm.
understand the history, doesn't know my history, doesn't know the history of our ancestors, doesn't know the hurt. So, you know, it's like if a child is being very prejudiced, there's not much point arguing with it. If it's just someone that's uneducated, but it doesn't have to stay with a child. There are plenty of adults that I can see that never really matured. And then you're trying to bring on a subject that requires certain maturity, it doesn't really go very far. And then you're dealing with very basic people. It's kind of like road rage. I just see it in this way, like when you're driving and you're dealing with a person that perhaps is stressed and perhaps is not very, you know, spiritually developed, or, you know, even in my best days, I could have a moment where I just lose my shit and yell at somebody. But it takes so much is what I'm trying to say. But in my experience, and I could say probably it's all over the place all the time. And when do you choose to be like, I see myself losing this patience easily sometimes, and I think that's also where the bluntness, because, you know, you spoke about being blunt and not having the language of nuance. I thought about this too, like where I had to learn for my own sanity and mental health to be more direct, because I felt like I never really got much understanding from the people around me because I'm an outsider. And I think when you are the other, it's easy, if you don't fight for it, to be pushed into the oblivion. Already you're not seen, already you're not understood. And then on top of that, whatever you say or do is a direct confrontation, not because you're confrontational. I don't think you as a person is confrontational per se, but just in contrast, it appears that you're confrontational. And then that's for me the tiringness. And then on top of that, having to take a deep breath and, you know, just remind myself that this person doesn't understand all these things and you have to break it down. But it gets to a point, you know, because there's a certain point when, for example, the racism, you know, this subject and term comes up, and then, you know, it's such a sensitive word. On a meta level, how else are we supposed to talk about this if it's not confrontational? You know, like,
Right.
I'm not even mad. I'm just trying to say it. So my options are either shut up,
Right.
which I don't really find it as an option, or I have to speak my mind. It is interesting that you speak about quietness. And how is your experience returning to the United States and more with your family? Has that transferred your interaction and emotion?
I feel I adore family. Family and home are extremely important to me. I have no idea why. I was endowed with it. I was endowed with the spirit of like settling and having harmony in my home and in my family. So I find that going to Europe, being with myself, forming a life for myself by myself, I basically strengthened my moral code in that way. Because when you're all alone, you kind of have to, you're the one who has to determine the boundaries. What extent are you willing to go to get this job, to make that money, to get that rent? You know, so it's like all these boundaries you have to form, and then you basically strengthen yourself as a person. So when I came back as like a person that I was proud of, and that definitely changed the tone of how I spoke with my family about some and any conflict that arose. But my family overall, at this point in time, is very harmonious. I think knowing myself better has definitely contributed to that cohesiveness. I find that it's way easier to be angry when you're fractured, when your identity is sort of shattered and you haven't taken the time or don't know to take the time to make yourself whole again. I mean, it's a continuous process of being rearranged. It's what living is, and it's what experiences do to you naturally. So you have to really know. Basically, everyone calls it, what do they call it now? Self healing or something. Something like this. Exactly. Very umbrella, very, very glossing over the nastiness of what really happens when you're taken apart. So I learned when I was in Europe, and what became extremely important when I came home, is how to make myself feel better again. There's always something going on, something up, something wrong, twisted, backwards, happening to you, with you, for you, all of this. Not everything you can be prepared for. I mean, because that level of preparation, you would basically become like a bastion. You become a wall, trying to prepare yourself for everything that may happen. You'll become one of those people that they deem cold and distant and so walking through this world, remaining soft and vulnerable and open-minded, while also fully knowing, fully understanding that something's going to fly your way, something's going to take you apart, something's going to pull your string, push that button, and you have to be able to address yourself. I mean, like, forget the other person for a second. Like, how are you going to deal with this thing brought to you? Because most of the times the things that frustrate you are things that are your mirror. It's the thing that tells you most about what's the most contorted part of yourself, the part of yourself that you haven't looked at in a long time, the part of yourself that you tuck away, that you don't want anyone else to see. At least for me personally, when something happens that seems totally normal to everyone else but sends me into a fury I cannot understand, it's usually a sign that something in me is talking, and I've been ignoring it and ignoring it, ignoring it. And something finally spoke to it, and it wasn't me. And I'm faced with, the task of having to sit down with this obscure part of myself that belongs to me that I just didn't want.
Can you give an example?
I don't want expectation. I know that it sounds weird, but I want to be able to give without expectation. I'm a giving person and I like to give. Sometimes there's this little sinister part of me, a seedling, that's watered by giving. As much as the good part of me is, I don't like saying good, as much as the most understanding part of myself, most empathetic part of myself is watered by giving, there's also this other seedling spirit that's a little bit more sinister that is equally watered by giving. And when I give, it says, what are you going to give back in return? What is this person offering you? Why are you giving this to this person? Do they deserve it? And I'm just like, why are you here? It's just asking essential questions right now. Like, what is your purpose? Because the part of myself that initially had the urge to give had no intentions of feeding into the sinister being within me that always wants something in return for what they give. I don't know where it came from. It's still something that I'm wrestling with. Probably some memories I need to tap into, definitely some therapy. And it's undesirable because I think that's also the seedling in me that's highly competitive, that fears giving, because of perhaps the insecurity that if you give, this person's going to be suddenly, soaring because of what you gave them, and you're going to be left behind. It's always a matter of thinking, okay, what's the deeper insecurity here? What are you actually saying, and how can we work towards your enlightenment? How can we make you lighter? Because ultimately these feelings are really heavy to carry. Anger, jealousy, frustration. They are some heavy emotions, entirely draining and poisoning from the inside out. My family, my chosen family, and the family that God blessed me with definitely inspire lightness, because to them, I want to give everything. So there's always an opportunity for me to look back at that little sinister part of me and work it, knead the dough. I'm like, and also you mentioned something pretty interesting about the language, like the harsh language of like white, racism. And I've been thinking about language a lot in terms of how can we address these problems in a way that sort of dethrone them. For instance, I've been experimenting with the word white supremacist. I despise that word because the implication is that somebody is supreme. It's like, goodbye. No way, and repeating that phrase over and over again aggrandizes it. It creates like this bigness for it that it doesn't deserve. So I was like, what is a word that not only dethrones it, but also normalizes it because certain behaviors within white supremacist thought we all harbor. And it's way easier to deal with things when you're able to relate to them. The minute you say, this is not of me, that's the moment where you're allowed to. You give yourself permission to judge. You give yourself permission to make this thing on your level. And then you can judge it. And then you can do everything to it that you can punch it, you can, and it's basically taking the inward work and projecting it outward. All of that work that you can be devoting to making yourself a better person, you're pushing out and telling that person that they're worse than you, that they're, you know what I mean? And I know this is pretty controversial because we want to believe that white supremacists are worse than us. We want to believe that racists are worse than we are. But at the end of the day, they're human. At the end of the day, we were all born. We all have navels. We all have belly buttons, psychologies, brains, everything. Everything's there. There's no reason why I should think that person is worse than me. We're all capable of it. We're all capable of murder. We're all capable of death, causing death, taking the life of things. And not just death is a physical death. There's soul death. There's a way of using your words to cut other people down, becoming a part of that person's traumatic psyche, being a part of that person's darkest thoughts. There's ways to suck the spirit out of people without being a white supremacist, just being yourself. I don't often talk about white supremacy. Instead, I talk about anti-difference, where people are just anti what's not them. And I prefer using that.
Yeah, there's so many different terms. There's also like global north versus global south, as opposed to first world or third world or developed nations, mainstream and outliers, and different levels of lazy thinking. There's the difficulty between making that choice, the difficulty of modernist thinking or postmodern thinking, whereby do you go with categorization, like whites versus blacks versus yellow, versus like, no, there's these whole structures and boxes is artificial and harmful. But then how do you address some of these inequalities and different levels of equity between groups if you can't even group people, if you can't structure these groups? These are kind of my issues of constant struggle of back and forth. I have these moments, like even with this podcast, like I want to talk about these things that are very invisible and I want to keep it very vague and lucid. But at the same time, in this current structure and systems, I won't be able to reach out to people if I don't put these labels in, like I want to be able to, like when someone searches Asian, I want to be the first one, like, but then I also don't want to be forever held to that mold, and like you said, give especially subjects that I don't deem the importance and the right to hold those kinds of powers, such as terms like white supremacy. I love a good confrontational discussion, and it's exciting, and
Me too.
then, of course there's skill in terms of not escalating, but sometimes it does. But then there's another type which is just hurt, and this kind of hurt, it's really tricky. Like, when do you go into talk about this? Like even little things, like you've lived in Germany, so I find the way that Germans love bland food, that triggers me. The way that they love, but here's the funny thing, I love it. I fucking love their bland food. But you know what I don't love? It functions for me, like my stomach, and I like the fact that there's so little flavor, and it's a kind of meditation. Like, they know nothing about food. They have no taste. They have no understanding. They have no wisdom around it. They're completely deprived. But it's a kind of meditative state whereby they are not in these crazy emotional roller coasters that is brought upon you through flavor, through spices, and they're just kind of in this equanimity peace, the way that Buddhists ascribe to the greatest achievement, where you have nothingness, which can also be described as depression. And that's how I describe German food.
Oh my God, you're funny.
But when I see like a German kid pick around the thing, and they don't like this, they don't like that, and then, you know how like Germans and Caucasians, white people, a lot of times they love dry food. Like they love a cracker, they love like a bland, just a waffle with just dry bread, just like it. But they love it. They love that, and that's fine. But when you speak about, and this is kind of where I wanted to get at, is that there's the part of us that wants to not toxify ourselves, not get so angry and worked up all the time. And like you said, to give without expectation. But I wonder, part of that, I think I do give, and with certain people, I expect more. And some of that bias is fair, and some of that bias is really not fair. Let's say if you come over to my house, right? There's like part of me that definitely like I'm totally happy hosting and I love providing and cook for you and enjoy. Then let's say a middle-aged white man comes over. There's a part of me that's like, I don't want to do anything. And that's like, if we are to actually, let's not even talk about you as like you and I have a relationship. Let's just talk about like from a phenotype perspective, and like, let's just try to recreate an experimental universe to test out my own prejudice and bias.
Okay,
I'm putting myself on the spot here. But like, do you see like, and then that's like, I'm telling myself like, that is so fucked up, dude. Like, you have such a bias. Like, why does one person I would treat a certain way and another I would treat in a different way? And I would answer, because I feel in my own experience, my own personal bias in conjunction with reading and in conjunction with some kind of idea of what's going on in the world geopolitically, that I somehow want to compensate because somehow my actions changes anything, which is so absurd. But there's a part of me that wants to be more giving and without having all of these expectations. But I know in my experience, I've had certain kinds of white men that dominate me, or even white women, or like, but then like, do I have a good statistics on all of these happenings? Am I able to really recount? And is it true? Is it fair? Is it really true that certain types of people have taken more advantage of me versus another? Or are these just narratives? You know, like, do I have the right to feel these feelings of vindictiveness because of colonialism, the effects of all that has happened? And then on top, like, all of these other issues, like when Black Lives Matter happened last year, and then there was the really interesting incidences about how people were treating Asians now, interracial issues, right? So there's like a lot of incidences where blacks are now attacking Asians with the same kind of rhetoric that Trump has like spewing to people. And the frustration of like, let's say the fight for the model minority position or whatever nonsense.
Yes.
And so all of these things comes into like very simple situations, like you come over for dinner and I'm like, do I give without expectation? Why do I feel expectation?
Right.
So all of these things are like constantly fighting for attention, and on top of the individual instances, right? Like day-to-day basis.
No, that so many things. Yeah, it is really difficult. I will say, the system we live in is impressive. What's impressive about it is that it makes it really difficult to imagine a different reality. It's something about this particular system that has been erected, before we were alive, you and I. And I think it's because it has a hold of our education systems. It has a hold of, the institutions, the higher institutions that created a hierarchy, then deemed it, enlightenment, basically rungs of re-education, where you go from young spirit, just think about yourself as a baby, not giving a fuck, just wanting food and like a breast or whatever you need, just needing love. Touch. I mean, touch is extremely important, and it doesn't lose its significance over time. The presence of touch. That's really all we need is care as human beings. That is the nourishing factor. Food doesn't matter when you don't have touch. These things don't matter. It's what really matters is the compassion, is the human interaction, is the warmth you feel from another body. This is literally it. And then, the system increasingly dehumanizes us and increasingly separates us. It makes touch less and less appealing. You know what I mean? I don't want this person to touch me. I don't want this person to be near me. And it creates this hostility within us because naturally we're supposed to be wrapped in each other constantly, to be honest.
Like people say, money doesn't matter. It's all about this other thing, like life and blah, blah. And I love the way you're even like, food doesn't even matter anymore. It's about touch. Like, like it's like next level, I love it.
It's next level. Yes, because I do believe the idea of nourishment comes from human interaction.
This morning I went on a huge rant, and I wish I recorded it, but
Oh.
I basically like spilled out the economic foundation of the Tinder economics, which can be seen as on a larger scale what's happening with society, right? First, we starve sexuality. We starve people. We don't let people touch. We don't let people interact. We don't let people connect. And so you have something like Tinder, right, that came along. And of course, they were one of the first movers advantage. It's owned by Match.com, and whereby the previous generation would spend like half an hour or more filling out some kind of bio and whole CV about your entire life. You don't need that with Tinder. You could just get in and connect your Instagram and have existing photos, and boom, you're away and you can fuck around the world. So you become the dominant piece in the market. So now that you have everybody in, but if everybody can just get their thing, there's no economic return. And the unfortunate thing about capitalism is like Tinder didn't come into this thing with a very holier than thou kind of ambition of like connecting people. No, they want to make money.
Right.
And to make money, they need to sell. They have a few options, but they didn't go with the advertising model. So they go with subscription. So why the hell would people want to subscribe to this brainless little swiping jackpot machine where you just keep swiping? You need to have people subscribe, but then how do you do it? You have to make it difficult for people. And so, for example, statistically on Tinder, the ratio is like 9-1 for female to male. Sorry, the other way. So for every one female, there's 9 men desperately.
Wow.
And so the desperation increases because just on simple supply and demand, there is so much demand for women and so little supply of women. So already that creates even more demand. And now you also make it more difficult for people to be seen. Now you can pay so that you can be exposed more. So you create competition so that you can be the quote unquote more providing male that has access to more money so that you can be seen by more suitors. And then in conjunction, they keep producing these misandric commercials where they basically talk a lot of, show how evil and horrible people are or men are. And so you deprecate their sense of self-worth so that they feel even more desperation to use the app to find someone to validate because they've never been validated. The lower the self-worth, the more these tech companies can make money off of the source, which is the over pumped, like from an economic perspective, like you can take any resource or any idea or concept and you overvalue it by depreciating the value of something else. And in this instance, it's like you devalue certain genders and overvalue another one. And that's where you can capitalize. My point is that it's these tech companies that's actually getting the advantage. It's Tinder and it's owned by men as well. And the same with like OnlyFans. And I'm not here to even shame OnlyFans. It's interesting to observe the way that economically it helps these companies make more money by devaluing these other people. But then the more people are lonely and disconnected, the more money these companies can make.
Right. Okay. Yes.
And so back to what you were saying, the statistic, right? Black women and Asian men have the least success in these kind of online dating situations.
Yeah.
And for me, when I came to Berlin, one of the things that I really love was the sex positive communities. And the way that for me was like the biggest therapy and liberated me in terms of like connecting with people, even though from a conceptual level, I still run into other issues from a philosophical and intellectual level. But from a physical level, that was like the greatest thing. And I'm curious how it is for you in terms of where you have been and where you are and where you're going, and what can be considered as chosen family and what can be considered in terms of like how you can or can't mingle with people and how touch works for you on that level.
Okay, so like some humans on Earth really care about self-betterment, and I'm one of those humans. There are a lot of opportunities out there. Thinking about the market, if we were to talk about the market, all these self-help books, all these self-help groups, all these self-help. So I was attracted to one of these self-help groups, but particularly in the domain of intimacy, because I was socialized to be alone.
Right,
Woo!
wow.
So I was, yeah. So I was socialized to be very self sufficient to the point of not needing anyone. And on top of that, I experienced some traumas in my childhood that led me to be distrustful. And on top of that, my astrological makeup, like how the universe created me, my imprint. So one of my people said, your contract with the universe entailed me having some abandonment issues and some lack of trust. So it was all there. It's all there. On top of that, Capricorn moon and Aquarius sun. So very hesitant to connect. Got some Scorpio in there. So I'm slightly secretive. There's a lot going on. And I was noticing it because I wanted to feel comfortable around the people I was having sex with, but I was not. And it was so annoying. I was just like, why can't I just relax? And it wasn't just like one of those turn the lights off when we're having sex deals. It was like a whole mental blockage happening where I wasn't willing to share myself emotionally. And it made me a particularly like manipulative person because I was just prone to it, where I was just more of a taker than a giver at a certain point in my life. And so one of the reasons why I left the United States is because it's an extremely isolating economic structure. Like it's really difficult to get to know people when you're grinding all day long, especially if you're new to a community. So I was coming back from college and living in Washington, D.C. And even though I'm from Washington, D.C., I was new in the idea that I was newly in my 20s. This is a new environment. I was interacting with the city in my teens. It's a totally different world. And I just found it difficult to connect with people. The scheduling, I mean, I had so many jobs. And even though I'm always a very active person in the community. So even though I was in a hot yoga class and I was doing this and I was doing that and I was doing this, and I was constantly surrounded by people I didn't know, and I love strangers, there was just no bridge. There was nothing connecting me to. I could not anchor myself there. So I left to Europe because I was repelled by the isolation I was experiencing, not just what I was imposing upon myself as someone that learned to be alone and someone that was afraid to connect with people, but also how the city was structured. CDC is a very corporate government city, and anyone that lives there can tell you that between 9 and 5, the train is completely empty because everyone's at work. So there's this, unlike Berlin, where people are constantly moving, that city is thriving, the lifeblood, it's really like people are doing their own thing. So everyone's schedules are kind of just like fluctuating. There's lots of opportunity to connect with people, lots of free time to sit down at the park and talk. Like that's what really grounded me there. That's why I consider Berlin to be a home. It's because something about that place, and it's most likely has a lot to do with cheap rent, allows people to really relax and to really explore themselves and to be the artist and to be the, musician, to be that unstable thing that, in the States, it's a risk, but in Berlin, it's just life. It's just who you are. And so I really enjoyed that aspect. So while I was there and I had lots of time to look at myself now, I couldn't just bury myself in all my obligations. I definitely had a lot more free time. And somehow I stumbled upon this intimacy workshop. Was that you? Was that you? You gave me the intimacy workshop thing, I think.
I mean, it
You
sounds
gave
like
me
something
like
that I would do
a
and tell you about.
yeah, I feel like you told me about it. So it was like this couple that travels around Europe and they're like they radiate sex and like happiness. And so, of course, everything they're saying is convincing because the aura is just so clean. And it was with these strangers. I was the only Black person there. There were some people of color, and I didn't feel uncomfortable at all with these strangers. We cried together. We like touched each other. It's something that I would never imagine myself doing because I had basically become like this cold asshole, this like icicle of a woman. I just thawed out there. I'm not saying I thawed out completely, but they gave me like meditation exercises, breathing exercises, language around emotions, because what I was really lacking is how to say what I was feeling.
Yes.
Because, feeling words, for some reason, they don't give you those when you're young. They need to give them. I don't know. I applaud parents who recognize the need to validate their children in terms of their emotions and giving them the language to communicate their emotions, not to communicate what the person did to them, but to communicate how they felt when that person did that thing to them. That's what matters. I think a lot of times we have a lot of language around blaming, a lot of language about this happened to me. Not a lot of equal amount of attention is paid towards being able to voice what that thing to you did, like what it did inside of you. What does that emotion feel like? And even after that workshop, I spent time with myself now in Massachusetts, journaling what embarrassment felt like in my stomach, what hate, like what anger felt like in my chest, what anxiety felt like in my shoulders, so that when I'm reacting to something, I know exactly what that reaction means. And then I'm able to tell the person, you know, it made me uncomfortable. I felt humiliated. You know what I mean? I felt it in my stomach. And I feel like it's really important to be able to learn that. It's the same way as learning the symptoms before you get completely sick with the flu. You know, I think we know the headache, the fever, all of that. It's very similar with emotions. And right before you explode on somebody, it's really good to just take a minute, pause, and be like, okay, where is this emotion coming from? Because every emotion has a different spot that it likes to inhabit. And I like to believe that my work with my body in this way came from that space, that intimacy space. And I thank them profusely for what that experience did to me and
Yes.
changed me in a lot of ways. Yeah. Berlin's good for that.
Yeah.
The sex clubs, the intimacy workshops, the connecting. Berlin is really good for that, ironically, because a lot of people say that I have to say, I didn't meet that many Berliners. I didn't meet that many
That's so
Germans.
funny. That's such a big point.
Yeah.
And like I know so many people that are having issues about visas and whatnot, and this whole like
Mm,
make Germany German again. And it's like, like, do you
okay.
realize like why Berlin is Berlin and why it's the way it is? It's
Hmm.
not because you whatever, like it's nothing wrong with Berliners per se, but it's like, again, it's like melting pots is what makes things really great. And
Exactly. Exactly.
such a concept, right? Like we need affordable housing that then can
Yes.
take people, like
Yes.
otherwise you're just on this
Uh-huh.
grind all day and there's just no
Yes.
space for any of these explorations and exchanges.
Mhm.
And so like even when
Mhm.
you said, like
Yeah.
when you said when you're sharing your feelings and your emotions and what a certain case is doing to you, and I think there's like the other part of that puzzle, which is that the other person also has to have the experience and the
Yeah.
ability to take that in.
That's true.
And
That's a fact.
yeah, and
Yeah, that's a huge part of chosen family
right,
too,
and
being able to be around people who can do that with
yeah,
you.
because there's
Mhm.
many people that just don't have that skill, and that's
Right.
not even something that I'm attacking these people. It's, if anything, it's
Mhm.
unfortunate for them,
Mm.
and it just makes it hard for everybody.
Mm,
I do
yeah.
wonder if more and more people start to get into these thinking, and yeah, it's a
Ah,
luxury,
yeah.
it's really a luxury. And
Mm.
part of me wants to, like, this is like the rap music, and it's like, wow, what a beautiful note to end on, and like positivity, and like let's just wrap it up. But like there's the part of me that can't help myself and go, you know what, like I'm not so, I think what makes life interesting is the fact that it's not just all Disney and happy and, predictable. It's like there's still risk. And it's also not like total nihilism where like we're all living in a concentration camp and every, whatever action and dream you have should be squabbled, and we should just be absolute pessimists. But like I said to you too, like that it's one of the most therapeutic things that I've ever been through. It's the most expedient, and in conjunction with psychedelics, let's say, it's just like you could get through like 3 decades of talk therapy over a weekend if you have the right substance and dose and the teachers and the people, right? Now, I wonder, there are some of these groups and communities, and I've seen racialized people come and go. And that's also been a bit of a discussion, and it's not an easy task. I think it might even require more advanced tools and space holding to iron those aspects out. So, like, I've seen a few instances where I imagine it could have been you or me. Like you said, you were the only black woman there. I've been in many instances where I was the only Asian person. And like when we're the unicorn, that's one story. And we come and go, and we're also not like maintaining, or it still feels a bit like tourism. For me, as I get into some of these communities, I oftentimes hit a dead end. It's time to talk about race, or it's time to talk about other issues. But that's the part where I sense that I get a bit more critical. And I guess that's the work, right? Like, and that's kind of where I was interested. Now that you're back in the US and you had these experiences and these new wisdoms and knowledge, do you see yourself back in your new home in the United States, within your community? You see yourself pushing or creating some kind of new ideas and ideals?
That's a really tough question. I don't know. I don't know. Because right now, I'm a writer, so I'm always going to have an idea to put out there. I don't really connect with the current state of activism happening in American society. There's a lot of anger, there's a lot of personalities. My form of idea sharing, I don't really like to perform. I just say what's necessary, and most times the things that I say have something more universal happening within them. I don't tend to participate in discussions related to the more intricate aspects of race and gender because I haven't taken the time out to prepare for those discussions. I discuss topics from an emotional standpoint, which I think that's probably why a lot of my ideas are rooted in universal thought and philosophies, because I speak from an emotional space. And what I see with activism right now, I can't spit percentages. I can't give you the really nitty gritty factual statements necessary right now about, percentages happening here and percentages happening there, what this community is facing, what that community is facing. I'm the type of person, where people are arguing about very real problems in society, and all I can do is project to the future. Yeah, that's all I can see. I'm like imagining a space in which they would just hug. You know what I mean? And I can't help it. I'm not the type of person to be really specific, and I don't pick fights, and I don't weaponize information and percentages about my society and societies happening elsewhere to reach a conclusion about how our world is functioning today. I look at factual statements and percentages, and I reach conclusions about how the world could function or should function. And often I find myself frustrated thinking about how we could be operating on a gift society and how on principles of the gift economy, and how the world is so abundant and how much it gives. Because I also don't think just in terms of humanity. I think in terms of the world as a unit. I love looking to nature and the interactions happening there, and how everything is, of course there's predatory behavior. Everybody got to eat. But then there's also this, the undercurrent is also togetherness, always this cohesiveness of everything working in tandem, from the moon to the ocean to the trees to the dirt to the worm to the beetle to the ant, the bird and the snake. Everything is just sort of always in this very beautiful dance together. And the elephant cries when its child's neck is ripped open by a lion. Dolphins, I think, fuck dead corpses. It's all there, the nasty and the good. And I can't help but to look at humanity and see the same thing. I recently did come up in my mind, and I thought to myself, there's a lot of struggle in American society. There's a lot of blood. And we've been tested. We've had people who want to see other people hurt as the president. We've seen very spiteful people, and we haven't completely fallen apart. I find that beautiful. Somebody wants a race war. Somebody wants a race war. In the midst of it all, the cohesiveness, this understanding that there's urge to do better underneath it all. And sometimes I'm a complete pessimist, and I'm like, no, no, everyone's morally corrupt. Me too. Darkness. I zoom outward a lot. When I do that, I'm able to really see that there's always going to be a problem. From a science viewpoint, the way that certain parts of our bodies operate is that it cannot ever be a balance. There needs to be something slightly off for things to fluctuate, for things to move, for our synapses to pop, for us to have thoughts. There needs to be an imbalance happening, and the imbalance is the balance.
Yeah.
That's how things.
Otherwise, it's just dead or gone.
Function. Exactly. Otherwise, it's dead. So that's how, when I sit back and I look at our world, all I can see is blood churning, electrons firing. All I see is the imbalance. This is what we're made up of. We're made of chaos. Some of us are caught in the crossfire. Some of us are way better at being agents of chaos than others. Some of us, that's the imbalance, is that some of us are this way and some of us are that way. If I hear someone say something rude, I'm like, that's rude. But am I going to get on my phone and write a paragraph or two, give my viewpoint on the politics and give my viewpoint on these things that happened? I don't tend to do that. I'm much more like, I'll protect people. I protect, I see someone getting pushed down at the park. I stand up, I'm like, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? These are my moments. These are the moments where I see myself most as an activist. But on a larger scale, my personality at this point is not rewired itself to take on what that would mean. People bite, they scratch, they rip you apart. It's just too many voices, especially online. And I don't have the ears for all those voices. Only got 2 ears. I don't have the capacity. I don't have the capacity. I have work to do. I have family. I don't want to do that right now. But I admire other people that do. And there's definitely a place for people who are wired for that. And I'm more than willing to support their causes in any way that I can, mostly financially, because everyone has a campaign, right?
All right, that's a wrap for season 1 of Asian Provocation. It's been a transformative experience on my end, and I love hearing back from all of your experiences. It's been truly life-changing. I'll be taking a bit of time off now to prepare for season 2. I've got some exciting episodes planned out. Meanwhile, I've got a Discord server set up. I've also got a Discord server set up where you're invited to come and chat and talk. We'll be holding different discussion points and panels. You can find me on Instagram or Twitch, where I'll be streaming more in the coming period. I'm very excited about the new paradigm shift that is happening to the global consciousness. This is a listener-supported podcast. You can find me on patreon.com. I'd like to end this first season with a beautiful piece from Akhir. You can read more of her work on her website at akhirali.com. You'll find her links in the description. Catch you on the flip side.
Observation. One should not expect the moon to come simply because night. Time guides shadow across the moon's face. We only know what we can count on our fingers, and this finger traces shadow to luminescence like alphabet. We sculpt a name that feels good in the mouth and speaks to crop and blood. Inevitably, the celestial being changes, and the name remains the same.